So I was actually given a box for this particular program. As you can see, it's Thinkin Things Collection 1. Develops essential thinking skills for kids 4 to 8. Made by Edmark. So this is going to be a pretty quick unboxing because there's actually not a lot inside. But hey, I was given the box for this, so might as well show it. It's funny though, it's actually got these stickers here. This section right up here, where it has the awards listed, that's a sticker. This thing here saying that it includes Kid Desk, also a sticker. There's actually a... you can hear it there. And take a look at the back here. Thinkin Things prepares kids for a lifetime of learning, at least if they're age 4 to 8. And it just shows the programs at the back there. There's a picture of the growth slider for setting difficulty. That's something that I don't actually show in the review itself, so just giving you guys a look at how it looks right there. One thing I do not like about this box, though, is that when you pull it out, it looks like, oh hey, tab thing, so maybe it's like opens in a special way, except, take a look there. It's hollow there, and it's hollow there too. If you take this out of the box, like leaning like this, everything's just gonna slide out, so you have to do it in a particular way. And then it sort of folds open, like that. And then there's not a lot inside. It's the floppy disk version, so got 4 floppy disks right here. And they all still work. Actually pulled the game off of them. And then right here we've got, well, the face recognition's picking it up. But it's basically a catalog of other Edmark software. Has the price... oh, it does have the prices listed inside. I bring up the prices in the review itself, too. Thinkin Things was $41.99. Oh, I was really close. I thought it was going to be like between $30 and $40. And then finally, thing. Enter to win a $10,000 savings bond for your child's education. Huh. Wonder if that ever came to pass. Anyways, there was probably a manual with this program at some point too, but it didn't come in this particular box. But anyways, that's all I got to show for the box here. Now, as for the program itself, it's actually an activity studio program, meaning that instead of being one cohesive game, it's actually a mix of 5, well, technically 6 mini-games, although only 4 of them can actually function as games. Now, all things considered, this is actually an exceptional software package. You guys know that I rarely use that word to describe anything, as I'm always finding nitpicks in the things that I play. But no, really, for the 4 to 8 age range this was intended for, this is an amazing piece of software. The only catch is that it doesn't actually directly teach anything. See, here's the thing about edutainment. And remember, I have experience working on commercial-grade educational math software intended for schools. You want to mask the educational components as much as possible without actually eliminating them. The less a child feels like they're doing work, the better your software is functioning, provided you're still teaching something in the process. This program is standing right on the border between edutainment and flat-out entertainment. Now that in and of itself isn't necessarily a bad thing, but what this means is that it's difficult to incorporate this program into a teaching plan, since you can't actually teach with it. All you can do is put it in front of a child and just let them use it as they wish. Well, that doesn't stop a parent or teacher from helping to guide a child in using it, it just makes it difficult to put this software to practical use beyond just letting kids play with it. And that's where this program ultimately shines, is that it does things in a way which helps to engage kids with its mini-games while surreptitiously teaching critical thinking skills. Now, you can't succeed at the mini-games on offer here without critical thinking, but the program isn't telling kids what critical thinking is or how it works. They're just put into the game environment and expected to solve visual and audible problems by clicking on the answers. When a child continually gets a problem wrong, certain wrong answers are eliminated to help narrow down the possibilities, until ultimately they're forced to put in the correct answer without the game ever actually solving the problem for them, which is another way you can tell how well this program's designed, because there's very little negative feedback, something you have to avoid like the plague when making proper educational software. The child using the software needs to put in the correct answers themselves, even when it's been made blatantly obvious, in order to help foster that sense of accomplishment. Thinkin Things Collection 1 was developed and released by the Edmark Corporation in 1993 and is a one-player activity studio program. Most of the program runs in a VGA 640x350 16-color mode. However, one of the special modes in this program, called Blocks, uses a 320x240 256-color video mode. Now, while not officially supported, I noticed that the game actually does run well enough to be playable with EGA hardware settings in DOSBox, minus the blocks portion of the program, obviously, as most of the color palette modifications are only subtle and not extensive, and because it's running 640x350, not 640x480. And past experience with actual hardware suggests that this should work on an EGA system without any issues. So if anyone can confirm that, let me know and I'll add that information to the video description. As for audio devices, just wow. I'd never even heard of a few of these before, and it's even more amazing that it can produce digital sound over the ad-lib of all things, though DOSBox completely butchers all attempts to buy anything to use ad-lib as a DAC. It's important to note too that the blocks portion of this program also supports recording audio clips with a microphone, but only a very small number of the supported audio cards actually support audio input. As for its current release date, this, like most edutainment, is still commercial, but thankfully, many of the Thinkin Things programs are easy to find secondhand and are very cheap, typically running between $5 and $15. Though there is a catch. See, this particular floppy disk version I have supports both DOS and Windows. However, there's also a Mac OS floppy version out there to be concerned with. Furthermore, when you do find a copy of the program online, chances are it's going to be the CD release, which as far as I'm aware, supports Windows and Mac OS, but not DOS. I might be mistaken about that, but all the information I've found online suggests this to be the case. Again, if anyone has any solid information on this, let me know and I can post the details in the video description. But suffice to say, this can complicate buying this program with the intention to actually use it, if you specifically wanted a DOS version. I should also point out too that there are other collection numbers and even other Thinkin Things programs which aren't considered collections and instead expand upon certain singular aspects of these programs, such as the Toonie Loon and the Fripples. Thus, finding the exact collection you want can be a little tricky. Also keep in mind that each collection is intended for certain age ranges. Collection 1 is for ages 4 to 8, as previously mentioned. Collection 2 is for ages 6 to 12, while Collection 3 is for ages 7 to 13. Since this is essentially a collection of minigames, we're going to go over each one in the program. But first, one of my Patreon supporters, Juan Rubano, had a very simple question for today. How popular was the Thinkin Things Collection series? I don't own them or even looked for them back in the 90s, so I have no idea how well they did on store shelves. Well, you have to consider that any software intended to be even remotely educational often didn't sell many boxed copies direct to consumers, but often did sell a ton of copies to schools, often under multi-user or site licensing details. Instead of selling a single boxed product for $30 or $40, you'd sell a single install package, not even necessarily with a retail box, along with permission to use the software on, say, 25 computers at a time, for something like $20 per computer, which would then equate to a $500 sale. Yet, due to only having to provide one install package, not 25, most of that is profit. And by the way, that would be on the cheap side of things for educational software. To that end, popularity of edutainment is often measured in a very different way. Sure, parents would go out and buy this software for their children to use at home, but they were the minority. Instead, popularity came from schools learning about the software, oftentimes from other schools or from the software vendors they work with, or through conferences and conventions held to promote educational products. It's a very competitive industry, unfortunately. The Thinkin Things programs were widely regarded as some of the best out there, but in order to get the resources to make these programs a reality, Edmark had to take their company public. And for 4 years, they were operating fairly well, but then they got bought up by IBM, who was looking to expand into other software markets. When IBM failed to get a good grasp of doing educational software, they sold all of the Edmark rights to one of their direct competitors, Riverdeep, which happens to be almost the same fate which befell Bruderbund and the Learning Company, as Riverdeep primarily pursued their own properties over those of the competitor companies that they acquired. Anyways, let's get back on track with Thinkin Things itself. Of the included minigames, 2 of them function in much the same way, so let's go over those 2 first. The Toonie Loon and Orangabanga. They're both music related and have much of the same functionality between them, except that the Toonie Loon is for playing musical notes, while Orangabanga is all about percussion instruments. When you first enter either of these parts of the program, it starts up in a special create mode, where the program is keeping track of which things you're playing and the timing between each of them. You can then play back what was input as many times as you want until you input something else, at which point whatever you originally input is removed from memory. With the Toonie Loon in particular, you can also change between different quote-unquote instruments, which only really includes one actual instrument, a xylophone, and a handful of more inventive means of playing back music. For instance, here's the Bubble Bobble theme as interpreted by a flock of chickens. The other mode you can enter is referred to as Q&A, where the character on screen will play something and the user then has to replicate what they heard. If they make a mistake, the character on screen will shake their head and play the tune again. Once the user gets it right, they move on to a different tune. The more different things the user plays, the harder it starts to get, but the increase in difficulty is very gradual. You can actually start the difficulty of any of these minigames higher up by using the Grow slider you can access from the side of the screen. Messing with this slider resets the internal progress being tracked, though the admin can also have this reset automatically when the programs quit. More on that later. The last thing to note with these musical modes is that you can have the lights turned off while the character performs, so that the user only has the audible cues to go on for replicating what they heard. This actually gets surprisingly challenging, even for an adult, and I don't recommend turning the lights out unless you want this thing to get super hard. Let's also get the blocks mode out of the way, as there's very little to it. You can either engage the blocks mode using spheres with customizable backgrounds, or with polygonal shapes. The way it works is that you place spheres or shapes onto the field, and they sort of just stay there, until you either use the buttons at the bottom of the screen to move everything, or move them yourself by clicking, dragging, and releasing before you finish dragging. If the object you drag is still moving when you release the mouse button, it retains its momentum, and thus keeps moving. In the sphere mode, you're able to set various digitized background tunes, which are all really short, but fairly decent for what they are. The backgrounds actually do have an effect in that they influence the Z depth of the spheres. The dark sections of the background cause the spheres to fall further away, while the lighter sections cause the spheres to move closer to the camera and thus get larger. You can also load a series of preset patterns referred to as ideas. In the polygonal mode, you don't get backgrounds or music, but each polygon can also be spun by dragging their corners, and you can even make them bigger or smaller by clicking and dragging their edges, with the smaller ones having quieter sound cues when they hit the sides of the screen. This is where the recording functionality comes into play, as the user can record their own sound cue for each object when they hit the walls, or just stick with the default sounds. Again, you can pull up ideas, though most of them have sounds disabled, so they're not nearly as fun as the ideas in the sphere mode. There's otherwise not much to the blocks game. It has no actual learning component, and it is mostly just meant for messing around. Next, we'll talk about the Feathered Friends game. By default, this mode lets kids create a feathered friend by selecting a color, a pattern, a hat, and some footwear. Up to 5 can be created at a time, and there's also a button to clear the ones which already exist. However, things get interesting when you put this into Q&A mode, as it becomes a game of pattern recognition. You have to determine which kind of feathered friend will fit the pattern being displayed, and while this may seem very straightforward for an adult, this is exactly the kind of critical thinking this program is aiming to have children learn, simply by giving them scenarios where they have to think about the outcomes logically. Now, unlike with the music games, if a child makes enough mistakes with this one, some of the options on the side will start getting removed, ultimately allowing only the correct options to be selected. Again, when making educational software, it's extremely important to never automatically answer the question and move on. You want to allow the child to enter the answer on their own accord, even if you have to flat out give them the answer. And that's so that they gain a sense of accomplishment. Otherwise, the child stops paying attention and thus doesn't learn anything. Though I do actually have a very minor criticism with this particular game, and it has to do with one of the methods used for clearing the feathered friends.
See ya!
Just to remind everyone, this is intended to be played by 4-year-olds. That's frankly kind of disturbing fact for someone that young. I mean, okay, I guess at least it doesn't sound like they're falling into a giant vat of acid or...
Goodbye!
Moving on. The last game in the package is definitely the best and most engaging of the bunch, called the Fripple Shop. The idea is that you have these weird pets for sale known as Fripples, which all come in a variety of shapes, sizes, colors, and other features. And the user has 3 options for taking orders. They can answer the phone to hear the Fripple request, they can take a fax to read the Fripple request, or they can answer the door to have a customer give them both a visual and audible Fripple request. Now, at the lowest skill levels, this is really simple, as customers often just want a Fripple with 1 or 2 defining features. However, at higher skill settings, this can get pretty challenging, with requests sometimes being for up to 4 features, having excluded features, or even having exclusive features, as in the customer will want a Fripple with 1 feature or another, but not a Fripple with both features. Now, just like with the feathered friends, if you select enough wrong ones, it'll start to dwindle the selections down until you're left only with the correct choice. The difficulty here is spot on, and it's fun to see all the wacky combinations of Fripple designs, as well as the different ways they bounce out of the store. Heck, they'll even occasionally bounce off of the table when they go to leave. This game's also a good example of the administration features available. You can access the administration, or adult features as I believe they're called, by pressing Ctrl-Alt-A while on the game selection screen. This allows adults to adjust default difficulty settings for each game, allows the fax or phone to be selectively disabled or enabled for the Fripple Shop, but one surprisingly important feature is the ability to either enable or disable quitting from the program. One thing a lot of people don't realize about software intended for very young kids, and in particular software a young kid can use without adult supervision, is that you want to make it impossible for the child to accidentally leave the software, since if they do, they might start messing with other things on the computer which you don't want them messing with. Disabling the quit feature makes it so that the program can only be quit from the administration menu, which the average child is never going to find given the key combination necessary to access it, and the fact that the game only requires the mouse to use, and is even compatible with the special touchscreen that Edmark had available. However, you still want to make it possible to have a quit button in case the program is meant to be part of a larger suite of software. Oftentimes, software like this would be shelled to from another piece of software with multiple programs available for play, in which case even a small kid should have access to the quit button.
Try playing that!
It's a breath of fresh air to see an educational program done as well as this one. It's not absolutely perfect, but it's really freaking close. And for anyone looking to engage their young children with DOS software, or even early Windows or Mac software, this is definitely worth picking up for that purpose. However, it does fail to provide any direct lessons or direct teaching, which means it's not really suitable as a teaching aid in a classroom environment, unlike some educational software. For parents, this is a non-issue, but for a teacher looking for older software to incorporate into their lesson plans, think of this one as something to have during free time as opposed to something you're actively trying to teach with. Although this program works with the max or auto cycle settings, they have some minor speed issues, so it's better to set a fixed cycles count, though this is going to be potentially a matter of preference. I was running it at a setting of 30,000, which made the blocks mode super smooth, but it caused a small handful of effects in the other game modes to time out kinda fast. Whereas if you run with anything less than 20,000, you'll get the speed closer to correct for the other game modes, but the blocks mode will have frame rate issues. Again, this is going to be a matter of preference, but my preference was for the higher performance. Anywho, that's all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Next week for episode 210, we continue Edutainment Month with one of the most popular pieces of edutainment ever released. And it's not even that advanced. If you think you know of a game like that, then be sure to send your guess to adg@pixelships.com and stay tuned to see what game this could possibly even be. Thanks for watching, everyone, and special thanks to those of you supporting me on Patreon. Here's just a small sample of you guys.